Well, good morning, Sagemont. Great to be with you. My name is Ben Mandrell. I'm from Lifeway Christian Resources. Thank you for partnering with us on all things Bibles, Bible studies, curriculum. You know, whenever I visit churches, I always want to say the right thing. And it's hard because you don't know churches and you have to say the right thing. And have you ever said the wrong thing? One time in my first church, I was baptizing my neighbor, Susan. She had come to faith in Christ, and I really wanted to be personal. You know, when you're baptizing people you don't want to just dunk them. So I was up there, and my family was out there, and I was just emotional. And I said, this is Susan. She's my neighbor. And the thing I love most about Susan is that I can go to her house and get sugar anytime I want. My wife's eyes got this big around. Later, she was like, you could have said eggs, flour. There's so many items you could have said. Well, the next day, I go into my office, and Susan's husband, Tom, has placed a 3-pound sack of sugar on my desk with a note that says, stay away from my wife. So I hope I don't do that today, but I feel a little safer because I'm catching a plane and I'm out of here after this, so I don't have to live with you people. Man, I have 4 kids, all teenagers. Pray for me, thank you. Here's the picture of my family. This is my wife, Lindley, and our 4 kids. My daughter, Ava, is a sophomore at the University of Tennessee. Go Vols. You're like the wrong orange. Anyway, this is my son, Max. He's a musician. He loves guitar and drums, and he's a senior in high school and is deciding where he's going to go to college. This is my son, Miles. He's a tennis player, constantly playing tennis. He's really good this year. We're excited about his tennis season. And then this is my son, Jack, future sports broadcaster. I'm just telling you, knows everything about every athlete. It's ridiculous. He can't memorize one verse of scripture, but he knows everything about baseball. Anyway, I'm a total failure as a dad. And then these are my 2 dogs, Sully and Finn. And I wanted to tell you about my dogs for a second. I was recently preaching on evangelism, and I came across this amazing quote on evangelism. And here it is. Let me just read it. It's really good. It's long, but it's good. None of us Christians espouse Pharisaical beliefs. In fact, we loathe them. Like, we don't believe in being a Pharisee. But many of us live them out nevertheless. We come to Christ, and in our desire to be godly, we seek out people like us. Ultimately, we arrange our lives so that we're with non-believers as little as possible. We attend Bible studies that are 100% Christian, a Sunday school that is 100% Christian, prayer meetings that are 100% Christian. We play tennis with Christians. We eat dinner with Christians. We have Christian doctors, Christian dentists, Christian plumbers, Christian veterinarians. Even our dogs are Christian. The result is we pass by hundreds without ever seeing them or positively influencing them for Christ. None of us are Pharisees philosophically, but we may be practically. It's very convicting. And that's a whole sermon on evangelism. But what really convicted me was this phrase about dogs being Christian. And it made me realize, like if you get this next slide, that I have one that's a Christian and one is this just unsaved, unregenerate creature who doesn't obey, who lives according to the flesh. Please pray for Sully and my relationship with him. It's getting worse. Luke chapter 16, that's where we're going today. You got a Bible or a Bible app? The weirdest story Jesus ever told. It's about a guy who's a dirty, rotten scoundrel who does some really shady things, and in the end, he's praised for it. It's the parable of the dishonest manager. Luke 16, verse 1. Now Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. So he called the manager and said, what is this I hear about you? Give an account for your management because you can no longer be my manager. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their houses, into their homes. So he summoned each of his master's debtors. How much do you owe my master? He asked the first one. 100 measures of olive oil. He said, well, take your invoice, sit down, make it 50. Next, he asked another one, how much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat. Take your invoice, he told him, and write 80. The master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age, and here's Jesus driving it home, the children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light in dealing with their own people. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. So the story's going along as expected until you get to the part in verse 8 where the master praises the dishonest manager. Until that point, you expect it to kind of play out as it's doing. The man is simply making and cutting deals with those who are well off. And you can kind of sense that he's padding his stats. So he calls in the first guy and says, how much do you owe the master? Oh, you owe him 1,000, make it 500. He cuts it in half. And you can just imagine how that conversation went. He probably said things like, hey, I called you in because I told the master, you're probably our best client. And I've been telling him for years, we need to do more business with you. And by the way, I think you're one impressive person. And have you lost weight? And then he called in the second one and gave him the same spiel. And what he was doing was thinking about the future and making plans right now. And what Jesus is commending in this story, and I'll get to more of this in a minute, is this idea of being strategic about relationships. Thinking about where it's going to end up and making decisions right now is really smart. And he goes through this entire passage, and you can also sense you just sense the tension of the listener of, is Jesus really doing what we think he's doing? He seems to be affirming dishonesty, lack of integrity. How could Jesus do that? And Jesus is doing what good storytellers do. They keep you listening. I run a publishing company, and the number one rule in writing is keep the page turning. Don't be boring. And Jesus creates this awkward story because he knows there's something about scoundrels that's fascinating to people. And so when it comes to the end, he gives us kind of the sense of, okay, now here's the real punchline. Here's the thing that I want you to hear. Is it for cheating? No. Is it for bribery? No. Is it for flattery? No. It would not be those things that Jesus wants you to learn. Every parable has basically one idea that you're supposed to take home. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Just get the main idea. And here it is in this one. Live today as if you're going to lose everything you own tomorrow. Live your life today as if the only thing that's going to be left soon are your relationships. Years ago, I heard the expression, beware of the barrenness of a busy life. And how easy it is to just go through the motions of everyday hamster wheel life. Like for me on many days, the greatest thrill is getting inbox to empty. Anybody else experience that? I cleared out all my email today. I did good. Or I returned all my phone calls, or I turned a project in on time, or I led a meeting well, and then I come home and I medicate on sports and crash, and tomorrow I do it all again. It's just real easy to get into the gravity or the routine of life and to realize years are passing, time is passing, and I'm not actually making a difference in any individual's life. There aren't specific people. There's just kind of this general mass of people that I'm helping, but no specific people that I am caring about. And Jesus says, beware, children of the light, when you're just going through religious motions or you're going through your everyday life and realizing there's not very many people that really know you or care about you. And the part of the story that's the crisis moment for him is he realizes, he says, what am I gonna do? It's kind of like, those of you who've been alive for a while know, you remember the day of locking your keys in your car. Remember that feeling when you peek over the window and there they are. And there's not a thing you can do but coat hanger that thing and ruin your window. And there's a sense of panic of like, what am I gonna do now? I'm stuck. That same kind of panic hits the hits the manager when he says, my whole life's been based on my identity in managing. Now he's going to take away my management. What's left of me? Where are my relationships if I don't hold this job? And he realizes quickly he doesn't have any real relationships. Arthur Brooks, in his book, Strength to Strength, tells the story about the day that his son called him out for having no relationships. He was in a car with his son. They were on a trip. He decided to take a work call. Work call went longer than he thought it would, but when it was over, he hung up the phone. His son said, Dad, who's that? His dad said, a friend. And his son said what sons sometimes say, the truth. Dad, you don't have any real friends. You only have deal friends. And he knew that his son was telling him the truth. That most of his relationships, if not all, the contacts in his phone were transactional. And the moment that his job goes away, the moment that management goes away, there aren't very men or women or kids or people that matter much to him. And so what Jesus is saying here is worldly, carnal, atheistic people are wiser about relationships than Christians. Like even the gangs of New York and LA have figured this out, that you need people to protect you, you need people to look out for you need people to watch your back, you need people to be fiercely loyal to you, you need people to make sacrifices for you, you need people that are willing to die for you. As human beings, we are created for connection and relationship, and yet when we become successful in business or in some pursuit, all of a sudden relationships are minimized, and career or ambition or fame or money, this all becomes part of the reason I'm alive. And Jesus says, atheists are better at this than theists in that they know they got nothing. And yet they start to make deals with people and build relationships with people. Are the values good? No. Is the whole system warped? Yes. But are they thinking, I need people to protect me, help me get through this life, help me reach the end? That's a really strategic thought. And so the idea here is, in verse 9, is like really the culmination of the passage. If you just look at the passage with me, and I tell you, make friends for yourself with your money, so that when your money is gone, these individuals will welcome you into eternal dwelling. So here's the picture. You're walking into the pearly gates, and you finally arrived, and there's a whole bunch of people, maybe there's 5, 10, 15, they're standing at the front waiting for you because they can't go in and enjoy heaven until you arrive, because they know they never could have gotten there had you not invested in them. They waited at the front of the eternal dwelling for you because you had done so much for them that when it was all over, the thing that really mattered to them, more than the money that you had or the fame or the power or the title, were the individual relationships that you made time for. And the greatest treasure, Jesus says, that you will have when this whole thing is over is that small group of people who are excited for you to arrive. Or that person that you're at the gate and you can't wait for him or her to arrive. Really wise people, Jesus says, think about that now and not later. Now, some people think this is a passage that's perfect for guilting Christians into tithing, and it really works well for that. If I could just do that for a second. Money is a big deal to Jesus. He talks more about money than prayer. Money gives you an indicator of the hold of wealth on your life. So if you don't make very much money, the human mentality is, I don't make much, I'm not going to tithe. It doesn't get easier as you make more money. Then all of a sudden, whoa, that's a lot of money. I could do a lot with that. So if you're a part of the 85% of people who attend a church who tip and not tithe, that's not the biblical command. The word tithe is very simple, 10%. And so if you're not being obedient to the Lord in the way that you handle your money, I think it's a major disruption in God's blessing in your life. Having said that, I think it would be too limiting to restrain Jesus' application to money. I think it also has to do with time and energy. And so I want to tell you about a book I read recently and kind of see if this dovetails together. There's a book I read recently, you may have read it, called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. The idea of the book is that our life is really dictated or remembered in moments. That relationships matter when there are moments the mind can cling to and say, this person was there for me, or I was there for them. And they said in the human psyche, there are actually, scientifically, 3 moments in your life that you remember if someone was there for you or not. It's the high moments, the low moments, and the transitions. Okay, so the first is the peak. The peak when you finished graduation, when you got your PhD, when you got married, all the photographic moments in your camera roll. Like, you remember who was there. You may not remember the conversations you had, but they were there. And sometimes they're big moments, and sometimes they're small moments. My daughter, Ava, and I, we went to an amusement park, to Universal Studios a couple years ago, and we rode the Harry Potter ride, Hagrid's, if you've ever been there. It's a motorbike roller coaster. And just as luck would have it, as we were getting in line, we got put in the very front car. And as the ride took off, there's this moment where it peaks up into the air and you're kind of hanging in midair. And because we were in the front car, we were higher than everybody else. And I remember very distinctly, for whatever reason, I looked over at her and she looked over at me and we were like, ah! And we still talk about that moment. Like, it has glued our relationship together. There's this peak moment that we've shared that nobody can ever take away from me. You can take away my job. You can take away my ability to speak. I might get throat cancer tomorrow. No one will ever take away Hagrid's Ben-and-Avra front row. Bronnie Ware, a famous nurse who helped people to their death. She was a hospice nurse, and she took notes on what they would say as their greatest regrets. And the most common theme was this: I wish I had lived the life I wanted to live instead of the one that was expected of me. The relationships, being there for people in the peaks is so important. It's why Romans says, rejoice with those who rejoice. The loneliest feeling in the world, perhaps, is achieving something great and there's nobody there to celebrate with you. So who do you know in your life right now that's experiencing great joy? Are you there for them? But then there's the pits. The pits are the valley of the shadow of death. Pits are despair and grief and sorrow and all the ugly things that happen to people medically, and losing children and wives and losing health and dreams. When you're in those pits of life and they come upon us all, we all need somebody to just carry our mat. I love Mark chapter 2 and the story of the paralytic man. He couldn't get to Jesus, but he had the most amazing small group ever. These 4 people who knew him well enough in his vulnerabilities that there might be a chance that this Jesus miracle worker could do something in their friend's life. So they hoist him up, they take him to the house. You can't get in, full occupancy. So they go to the roof and they make a hole and they lower him down to Jesus, and he's healed. He has an encounter with Jesus, but not because of his own faith, because of the people in his life who carried him along when he couldn't carry himself. And so people ask me, what's my hope for the future of the church now that COVID's really killed church attendance? Let me just be really clear here. The only thing that COVID killed was nominal, marginal church attendance, consumer attendance. What brings people back to the church is relationships, and guess what? That's what it was supposed to be all along. So the actual core of the church is quite healthy. In fact, most churches during COVID either giving remained or increased. What does that tell us? It tells us that those who are dialed in, those who are connecting, those who are in relationship, they're continuing to carry the load of the church just like they always have. Because what the church is not a place to get content. It's good to get content. The church is a place to get community. And there's going to be a day when a doctor says to you something you don't want to hear, and you're going to need some people around you. Be there for people in the low moments. But then the third category, which I find to be the most fascinating, is the transitions of life. When someone moves to a new city and feels all alone, or moves to a new job and hates it, or moves to college and struggles to adapt, or moves out of a marriage into a divorce. Whenever we go through seasons where life is changing quickly around us, we feel overpoweringly alone. And we need people to come alongside, not to preach to us or even give us truth, but to just give us their presence. I think if you read the book of Job and all of its depression, it's the most depressing book ever to read. I can't ever get through it. But one thing that it reminds me every time is that when people are suffering, just shut up and sit there and cry with them, rather than try to tell them why it happened, how it happened, or how they should feel. And when you are suffering, you want someone to come and just be present. And so I was reading this book about power of moments, and then I came across this passage where Jesus is talking about the strategic nature of relationships and why we should invest in those now. And it really kind of came together for me in terms of the temptation that we face in life to minimize relationships to our own demise. And so I came up with 5 very convicting questions that I wanted to ask myself, but I'm going to read them out loud to you so that you can feel just as bad about yourself as I did about me. Number 1, are you investing in other people by praying for them? Be really honest. How many people do you tell that you pray for? Hey, praying for you. Do you actually have a list? Do you actually have a rhythm, a routine? Do you actually have a structure? Are you committed to being an intercessor for them? Because that's a big commitment and a big thing to say to someone. Or are your prayers largely like mine, narcissistic to the core? Lord, help me in this meeting today. Help me figure this out. Help me how to talk to my teenage kids. They're mute. Help me how to prove to my wife that she really is wrong. Like, help me with this dog, please. I mean, most of my prayer is profoundly about me. I'm so convicted about that. I'm just realizing, like, I'm having my early midlife here. But how long can you be self-absorbed before you just run out of interest in yourself? A man wrapped up in himself is a small package. If God were to report out on your prayer life, how much of it is just about you and what you want? All right, question number 2. Glad that one didn't hurt anybody. Are you intentionally investing in any relationships in this church? Are there people here week by week who are getting to know you and your story more? Are you following up with people and say, we should do lunch sometime? Are you actually calling them to say, I've got Wednesday open? Because if you're not going deeper with people in relationships, you're really not getting to the very core of what Jesus created this to be about, which is vulnerability. I mean, it's really a sad commentary in the church when you can come every week to a church and stare at the back of people's heads and there's not a single person that knows that you're struggling with an addiction, or you have a marriage that's crumbling, or you have a faith that's hanging on by a thread, or you have a father that's abusive, or you have a job that is absolutely destroying your mental health. And let me tell you the best definition of vulnerability I've ever heard. When you're vulnerable with somebody, you're giving them enough information that they could hurt you with it. If they took that piece of information and put it on Twitter or shared it with the wrong people, they could really hurt you with it because you have shared with them the dark side of who you are. Mark Twain said, every man is like the moon. He has a dark side he doesn't want anybody to see. You need to have in the church, if it's really going to be the church, you need to have a few people at least who know the dark side of you, the weak side of you, and they walk with you in it. Are you investing in any relationships in this church to where that could happen eventually? Probably not a good idea to share that week 1 in Sunday school, just saying. Maybe save that for week 10. Number 3, are you investing in a younger person that looks a lot like you? Big part of my story is both of my parents experienced severe mental health in my 20s, and so I lost them as emotional support in my life through a very important time of finding myself. And so in the years where a lot of people have a dad to guide them and direct them, I was flying solo and kind of took pride in that, developed a sense of rugged independence, and now I'm paying for it. Now I'm going through counseling to figure out, why am I so mad about it? And the thing that really helps me is when I find a 23-year-old young man now that looks lost. Looks like he could use a dad or a big brother. Could I be for him what I needed in my 20s? Is there a way to actually take this pain or this wound and turn it into something that's gospel and transformational? And wouldn't it be good of God to be able to do that? To take what even the enemy meant for evil and turn it into good? And the thing about this, when you're looking for someone to mentor or pour your life into, you can't program it, structure it, or make it happen. You look over one day and there's this person that's just a little bit behind you in life that could use some help. Do you have eyes for those people? What if God's bringing you those and you're not seeing them? Number 4, can you think of anybody right now that's in one of those 3, peak, pit, or transition? Can you think of somebody that's celebrating a great moment in their life, or they're walking through a deep grief, or they're in the middle of a scary transition in their life, and it would mean a lot to them for you to show up? Whether by text, call, email, letter, or physical presence, just show up. One of the things that I'm learning about myself is it bothers me when people don't miss me. Like, I really want people to miss me. I have a need that when I'm gone, that someone would say that you mattered. So I've pastored 2 churches and gotten called away from 2 churches. And unless you've done this as a pastor, you don't know the pain of leaving a church that you love. It's just so deeply to your soul painful. And I got a text this morning between the services from a guy in my last church. I got to lead his dad to the Lord, and his dad passed away. And he said, I miss you. It just meant a lot to me. So all of us have to come to terms with the fact that we have needs and we need people. And we can't fill all those needs ourselves. So can you think of people who are in the peak, the pit, or the life change? Last one. This is the hard one. Are you tending to the hurt where others haven't been there for you? Surely you can think of a moment in your life when you needed your mom or your dad or your sister or your brother or your best friend. This moment you felt overpoweringly alone, and this person dropped the ball. They weren't there. Or maybe a time when somebody in your life who was very important to you needed you, and you just weren't there. You weren't capable of being there for them, and for whatever reason, you've always regretted it. This is where the real essence of our faith is so beautiful, because Jesus died for all those moments. Jesus came to the earth, died on a cross, so that you wouldn't have to continue to punish yourself for all the areas that you have fallen short, because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We've all not been there for somebody. We've all experienced the pain of not having someone there for us. As human beings, we love them perfectly. But we do have to tend to the hurt and call it what it is, brokenness that we have in our life, because there was a moment when I needed my dad and he wasn't there. There's a moment I needed my mom, she wasn't there. These moments matter. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's a lot of really great history there. I love history. My kids are annoyed with me when we go to museums because I actually read. And so I like going and learning and listening to the stories and finding the history. And there's this place you can go in Nashville called the Carter House. It's a Civil War battle site. It's where the North and the South collided right up on this piece of property, right up on this house. And the tour guide was telling us about all the different places where battle broke out and where bullets were fired at these homes. And he said, I want to take you to this one outbuilding because it's where a lot of the heat of the battle happened, and you can really get a sense of the wreckage. And so we come up to this little outbuilding, and from the outside, to me, it looks great. Like, wow, it's really held up over the years. He said, well, just wait till we go inside. And we walked inside this building and we closed the door, and I turned and I saw this image that is forever fixed in my mind, and I took a picture of it. And from the outside, I couldn't see any of those holes. But from the inside, I could see them all. And when I looked at that, this is what I felt the Holy Spirit say to me: that is a picture of you. And this is why I came to die for you. And this is a picture of your marriage. And this is a picture of your parenting. And this is a picture of your leadership at Lifeway. And this is a picture of your pastoring of 2 churches, that you have left so many holes. And yet Scripture says, he who had no sin became sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God. So in some weird way that I'll never fully understand, when God looks at me, he doesn't see the holes. He sees the righteousness of his Son. And I don't have to spend the rest of the years, however many I have left, beating myself up for all the times that I was not complete and whole for people. And I don't have to spend a whole lot of time resenting them for not being complete and whole for me. Because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory